Hello and welcome to today's Wisdom Wednesday on the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Susanna.
And Dr. Ben here.
And we're both naturopathic doctors who support individuals in reversing disease and reclaiming optimal health through whole food plant-based nutrition and mind-body medicine.
And welcome to another episode of the podcast, Wisdom Wednesday, where we get to discuss mind and thought and consciousness and the brain-body connection. And that's really the topic of today's episode. I thought it would be great to talk about the brain-body connection because all of these conversations that we've had about, victimhood and like what have we talked about in the past, our experiences and kind of, feeling our emotions and just
the inside out, the outside in reality, the inside out reality.
Navigating through life. And the intention, of course, is to feel peace. And sometimes I forget how we fail to bring it back to the topic of our physical health and well-being. Of course, like feeling peaceful, we all want to have more peace in our life and experience more peace and more joy and more good stuff. But the implications of that with regard to our physiology and our experience of health are really important. So sometimes when we draw these connections, we are empowered, and especially when we also understand where our human experience is coming from, we're also empowered. And these are very important things in the context of, the disease reversal journey and the journey towards more optimal health, because it's really, in my perspective, kind of an uphill battle if we are constantly, for lack of a better term, just chronically stressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and luckily there are so many more doctors and practitioners talking about the brain-body connection, or more specifically, they're asking their clients or patients about their stress levels and maybe doing some amount of education that, okay, well, your stress level, it's probably not helping whatever physical condition you're experiencing. But, generally where the conversation then goes is, to help with that, either, seek a counselor or try some breath work or try some meditation, or, there's practices that are often prescribed to help bring more mindfulness, to help bring down stress levels. And actually, we have a different approach, and you've gotten a taste of it in our Wisdom Wednesday calls here. Really, our approach is not to be prescriptive with certain practices, even though, there's definitely a lot to be said about breath work and its effects on the nervous system. But what we've witnessed has had a more lasting effect in creating more peace and reducing stress sustainably moving forward is simply understanding where the human experience comes from, understanding where stress comes from. And when we understand, automatically what happens is we understand, we see things, and the result is that we don't get worked up as easily.
Yeah, we're no longer victim of our external circumstances. We're empowered in our life. But I really wanted to talk, thanks for that little introduction, but I really wanted to talk about the brain-body connection, some scientific stuff. And I use this term brain-body connection instead of mind-body connection, just because really, it's the brain-body connection. It's the wiring of our nervous system, and the technical scientific term is psycho-endo-neuro-immunology. The connection between our psychology, our thoughts, state of mind, with our neurology, the branches of the autonomic nervous system, our endocrinology, our hormones that are then activated, and our immunology, the activation or suppression of our immune system. And this, of course, has effects on our respiratory rate, our digestive function, our immune activation, our blood sugar regulation. All of these things are connected via this brain-body psycho-endo-neuro-immunology connection. Whereas mind, I don't know about you, Susanna, but when I think about mind, I think about how mind is kind of the force that is present in all fragments of life and our being, so mind is present and wisdom is present in our cells. That is kind of that force that's constantly guiding our cells, constantly guiding our physiology in that kind of balancing act. So yeah. And one little quote that I've heard, I don't know who like said it, but I've heard it said that our cells are constantly eavesdropping on our thoughts and state of mind and emotions. And that really, in a nutshell, talks about really what I wanted to discuss today, is how our cells are eavesdropping, the scientific connective connections, the processes by which our cells, our physiology is constantly connected with and eavesdropping on our thoughts and state of mind. And with that kind of knowing and understanding, it's like, oh, maybe I should be more mindful of my state of mind. Maybe I should allow myself to be more sensitive to my emotions so that I don't get super worked up and then suppress things and get all bottled up. And it's like, because you can't hide that from our physiology. Our physiology doesn't lie in it. Another thing that's coming to mind is the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? And that really kind of, in a nutshell, also encapsulates this message of the body doesn't lie. Like, you can't hide anything from the wisdom of the body. And that's a really awesome thing, because it allows us to be constantly connected with truth, constantly connected with like a barometer of what's going on in our state of mind, our consciousness. And thereby we can respond and understand and really be a partner and an ally in our healing process, rather than our mind and thoughts and emotions being this kind of obstacle that oftentimes we experience being the case.
Yeah. And can I share a recent example of the brain body connection in
No.
action?
Cool.
Because, we've all experienced it. There's not one of us that has not experienced the brain body connection. We just need to look for examples, right? And my most recent kind of blaring example was on Monday. I was flying from New York to Colorado. And in Colorado, we've had like the windiest
It's
spring.
been crazy.
It's actually in the records, I believe. It's been one of the windiest springs since some year. I don't know.
Yeah, the night before Susanna flew, there's like tons of trees that flew down or fell down. There were like 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds with gusts up to like 60 or 65.
Anyway, usually I'm not afraid of turbulence. Usually I actually find turbulence to be a little bit comforting, kind of like
turbulence in the air.
Turbulence in the air. Oh yeah, being in an airplane. Turbulence in the air. It's like being rocked as a little baby. Sometimes I really like that. But this amount of turbulence was beyond my comfort level. And I experienced the brain body connection in many ways. My heart was pounding out of my chest. My stomach was, just like my digestive system was just like clamped down, butterflies, nervousness, like icky nausea. I was literally like jumping and grabbing the handles of my seat. And what was the content of my thinking at that time? Well, it was, gosh, I really hope I don't die. I really don't want to die.
Yeah.
I was really in fear mode. That was probably the most afraid I've ever been on an airplane. But I mean, how that translated to how I felt in my body.
Yeah.
I mean, even after the flight, my whole nervous system felt wired.
But that's a great example of acute stress, and
Mm-hmm.
the activation of the acute stress response, otherwise known as the sympathetic stress response, that leads to activation and release of adrenaline and cortisol. And the whole mechanism and intention behind that sympathetic stress response is giving your body access to blood flow and energy so that you can literally escape and survive. So if the plane did crash, then you better hope that you've got the activation of the sympathetic nervous system so that you can get what you need to and go and have kind of the clear thinking and the open wide eyes to navigate the circumstance. But the plane didn't crash, fortunately. And you were able to allow yourself to glide back down into default state of mind, default state of nervous system. And it's a great metaphor, I think, because a lot of people are navigating life day by day and feeling the turbulence kind of chronically. A low, maybe a low grade turbulence, like not like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, but stressful thoughts around relationships, around work, around health, around symptoms, around you name it, right? Around there's a lot of things that we can point our awareness and think about and have doomsday scenarios. And again, maybe it's not like an existential big event and it's not like a panic attack. I think panic attacks are pretty awesome, to be quite honest, because we're really sensitive to it so that we can like respond accordingly. But a lot of people, again, have this kind of low grade chronic stress that just becomes normal.
Mhm.
And it's like the turbulence is kind of normal. And our intention is to make peace normal, which is the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. We've got two branches of the autonomic nervous system, and the sympathetic is there to keep us alive in kind of survival situations. The parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is really our default state of functioning. That's the quote unquote rest and digest, and also heal and regenerate, and all of the things,
Detox.
detoxify, all of the things that are critical for our healing process or regenerative process happen when we have the parasympathetic branch activated, which makes sleep so important, because for a lot of people, sleep is really the only time when the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system can be fully activated because of the chronic stress in day-to-day waking life. But hopefully, we can be in a regenerative state of mind, regenerative state of physiology, while we're awake and while we're moving through our life.
Yeah.
That's kind of my intention, is to have the parasympathetic branch activated, which is associated with kind of release of digestive enzymes, digestive functioning, bowels moving, of course, our decrease in blood pressure, decrease in regulation of blood sugar. It's like we don't need to be running and active, so we can put all that energy, put all those resources to the regenerative potential that we all really have built into ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and to really understand the impact that this chronic stress, this chronic low grade stress can have on our physiology long term, we simply just need to look at what the sympathetic responses are to stress. And in that acute example that I gave, where, I really was feeling like, oh my gosh, am I going to die? A few things happen. Heart rate increases, breath rate increases, blood pressure
Also, I
increases.
imagine shallow breathing.
Digestion shuts down. Blood glucose actually rises. These are all ways, they're all methods for the body to prepare
Yeah,
itself
I
to
already said
try to.
that.
I know, but if we think of what you haven't said
Okay.
is when these physiological processes are happening long term,
Hmm.
there's no survival advantage. That doesn't help us long term. It doesn't help us to have high blood pressure chronically every day. It doesn't help us to have a higher heart rate or shallow breathing or impaired digestion on a daily basis. No, that's the antithesis of healing.
Right. So, yes, I think that it's a great segue into the acute stress response, which we're all so familiar with, the turbulence on the airplane, with the consequences of the chronic stress response, the chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And I think the biggest issue is chronic hormonal dysregulation. Otherwise, maybe some people would know it as hypercortisolemia, high levels of cortisol, which, of course, is kind of like the stress hormone. Not that it's a bad thing. We all have a normal rhythm of cortisol, or we should have this normal rhythm that is in part for dictating and guiding our circadian rhythm. But when we have high cortisol throughout the day, then that disrupts and interferes with the all the other hormonal signals that are being sent in kind of rhythmic fashion. So the hypercortisolemia, the adrenal stress, and all of those things really kind of set the stage for chronic hormonal imbalances. Of course, like you were saying, when our stress response is activated, we're not going to be digesting, absorbing, assimilating the nutrients from our foods. Of course, we're also going to be in a tense place, kind of muscularly. So if we think about like the tension headaches that we might have, that's also happening in our vascular system, because our vascular system, our blood vessels are wrapped with muscles. So we have kind of a chronic constriction of our vascular system, which impedes proper fluid, healthy, relaxed blood flow, which raises our blood pressure, creates more turbulence, and causes endothelial dysfunction, and kind of that sets the stage for more of an inflammatory response. And speaking of inflammation, the high level of cortisol is suppressive of our chronic immune system. We know that
Of our
chronic high levels of cortisol suppresses our immune system.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a side effect, right, of taking cortisol, taking steroids pharmaceutically.
Mhm.
So these are significant consequences for being in a stressed state of mind, and maybe it leads you to feel stressed about stress. Right. But the really good news is, like what you were kind of starting this conversation talking about, Susanna, is that stress is not our default state of mind. Peace is our default state of mind. And really, when we understand where stress comes from, which is just kind of taking our thoughts seriously, then we can, the way I just visualize like changing the channel on the TV. Like it's like I'm scrolling through and I get fixated on some TV show, and it's stressful. It's a stressful thing. And it's like, but it's kind of amusing. I'm absorbed in it. But literally in any moment I can turn off the TV or change the channel, look out a different window is another good metaphor, and have a completely different experience. And then my cells are able to eavesdrop on something, more harmonious.
Mhm. Yeah, so, rather than, I mean, the typical approach to decreasing stress is to talk about stress management practices, like we mentioned, breath work, meditation, yoga, etc.
Yeah, what's your favorite way to eliminate stress, Susanna?
Personally, like as a practice,
No, I mean, what's your favorite way to eliminate or experience more peace?
well, what's worked reliably and the best for me is actually to do less of those practices and to spend time understanding where stress really comes from. And, I think it's so easy for us to look outside and say, well, my stress comes from my work, or my stress comes from my relationship, or my stress comes from my kids, or my stress comes from all of the current events right now, or whatever it is. But the empowering missing link in what actually causes stress is understanding that it's actually not those outside things that are leading to your stress. It's just your perception of those things.
Mm,
It's just your thinking about those things. So
mm.
if we go back to my plane example, when I was in a plane, well, I mean, these pilots are very experienced. The plane would not even be flying if they thought the conditions were dangerous enough
I
that it
told
would lead to a
I
crash.
told this to Susanna when she was in Denver about to board her second flight, and I was like, "Pilots got this under control. This is their bread and butter. They fly in the wind all the time."
Yeah. Was I actually in a life threatening situation where I needed to activate my sympathetic nervous system? No. But my state of mind thought I was. The quality, once again, the content of my mind was literally like, "Oh my gosh, I've never been in this much turbulence. I might die. I don't want to die. I want to live." And just over and over and over again, working me up, working my nervous system up. And that's kind of in a cute extreme example, but we can look at every
Mhm.
occurrence throughout the day, even the most mundane situations, and
Mhm.
see examples of where we blame our stress and experience on what's happening outside of ourselves
Yeah.
and not looking at what our perception of those occurrences are.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying, Susanna, is that the stressful thinking that you had on the airplane, you became aware of that and you kind of allowed yourself the dignity of that process to have that experience. But you also had the knowing that the stressful experience was coming from the stressful thinking. And I mean, I think that I don't know if that's the best example, to be quite honest, because that is like that acute sort of scenario, like, a car accident or something where it's like there's a reason for like again, like if that plane crashed, like there's a reason why you want good healthy heart rate and blood pressure, and there's a reason why you want your digestive organs to stop functioning because there's other priorities for survival.
Right. So, what's a good chronic stress example?
Well, the good chronic stress example is just, playing the blame game for our emotional experience, not taking responsibility. And I think that when we're in the cycle of trying to manage our life and thereby manage our stress, like, fix our work hours, fix our child care scenario, fix our relationships, fix our finances, like whatever it is, when we're constantly working to try to fix things because we think that that which is out there and that is like the imbalance is out there, then we're constantly in overactive drive of fix it mode and just that chronic stressful thinking, or I would like call it stressful thinking or just call it overthinking, because thinking is stressful. Especially when we get really engaged in there and kind of push the gas of our thought process, and kind of grind the gears up there. So to me, that's kind of the fundamental underpinnings of the chronic stress response in our modern society, is this constant um, figuring out stuff and fixing stuff and managing stuff rather than disengaging and knowing that we are always okay, supported, and we don't need to know everything and have all the answers immediately, because all of the answers are constantly coming to us when we're in an open, clear, peaceful state of mind and we have exactly what we need when we need it. And 100% of the time, at least in my experience.
Yeah. In other words, rather than trying to change the world or chase peace, thinking that peace is something that we can create outside of ourselves, that we need to go find, the real empowering medicine is realizing that you are peace. Like
Yeah.
you are at your core peace.
Yeah.
When your mind is in a clear state and the busyness of your thinking passes, the only thing that's left is a state of peace, is that default parasympathetic activation. And while it may seem too good to be true,
It's not.
it's true.
And I think that's a beautiful place to end, because, of course, I think the longer that we have these conversations, this was an interesting one. To be quite honest, I didn't really debrief Susanna with my intention, so we kind of came at this from two different angles. I really wanted to just talk about the science and understand the science, and Susanna obviously is bringing the important wisdom to it.
I just got off a mindset call, so I'm
You
in a
did.
different place.
You did. You're in a different place. But the interesting thing is, like, the more we talk about the innate wisdom from a scientific perspective, the more we tend to activate the thinking that just naturally takes us away from the truth of the matter, and the peace that we are. So it's always, I guess, good to maybe have a practice, quote unquote, of doing nothing, like doing nothing, allowing ourselves to be, and to be with our essence. experience more of the essence of our true nature.
Can I wrap up with a little announcement?
Sure.
Okay. Well, this is new, that if these conversations with Wisdom Wednesday conversations are really kind of sparking some intrigue and inspiration, and you're feeling like you'd like to realize more of your innate peace, I'm starting to offer one-on-one coaching calls just
Cool.
on this very topic, different from my naturopathic consultation. So if you're interested, just reach out, and yeah, would love to get to know you.
Sounds good. Thanks for hanging with us for another Wisdom Wednesday episode. And feel free to leave any comments or feedback. We appreciate all of that and look forward to staying connected and seeing you guys next time.
Bye for now.